In 1950, a committee comprised of people from 17 countries got together to select the person they would name the man of the century. And the person they selected was a 75-year-old man by the name of Albert Schweitzer. Now, 2 years later, Dr. Schweitzer would actually win the Nobel Peace Prize. He was known and renowned in the early part of his life for being a concert soloist, a writer, an historian, a theologian, a philosopher. He was well known, was making quite a bit of money, and essentially had life by the tail, we would say. What people didn't realize was, at the age of 21, he decided he would continue with that sort of life until he reached the age of 30. At 30, he determined to enter medical school and become a doctor and serve the poorest of the poor in Africa. So you can imagine, on his 30th birthday, he announced to his family and friends that he was turning his back on this wonderful life that he had, a life of renown, being famous, not wanting for money, to become a doctor and go to what was then called Equatorial Africa, to a place called Gabon, to a hospital, and become a missionary doctor at a missionary hospital. Of course, they thought he had lost his mind. Why would anyone turn his back on the life that he had, a life of renown, a life of leisure? Well, he would explain it over the years by saying that today's gospel, the story of the rich man and Lazarus, was one of those things that motivated him to do that. He thought to himself, as he meditated upon the scripture, how could he live such a wonderful life while so many people in the world were suffering? He just had to do this. He wound up in Africa and lived to the ripe old age of 90. He died in 1965. At the age of 38 is when he actually earned his medical degree, and 5 years later he had the hospital built. And he spent the rest of his life, from the age of 43 on, at the hospital. This brings us to today's gospel passage. You see, the sin of the rich man was not a sin of committing, of commission. It was a sin of omission. There's nothing to record that he had Lazarus removed from outside his property, or that he kicked him, or he mistreated him, or yelled foul language at him, or anything else like that. See, the rich man's sin was one of omission. He omitted doing it. He omitted doing those kinds of things that he should have done, like help the man out. It's pretty clear the rich man was very rich. We hear how he lived sumptuously, he ate sumptuously, he wore purple garments. The color purple was very, very expensive. Think of the royal purple that we wear at Mass during the season of Advent. And yet he had to walk by this poor man with sores, begging, with the dogs licking the sores right outside his very door, right outside his very gate. Every time he came in and out, there was Lazarus. But the rich man's sin was that he somehow or another didn't notice Lazarus. See, to him, he was rich, Lazarus was poor, and Lazarus just kind of melted into the scenery. He didn't even pay attention to him being there at all. You see, the sin of the rich man in today's parable is being committed all over the world today. The gap between the rich and the poor is widening all the time. The poor need help. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, back in the 60s, once remarked that if a free society can't help the many who are poor, how can they save the few who are rich? In other words, our lack of concern for the poor It's destroying not only the poor people, but the moral fiber of our country. And that returns us to you and me. We have the same opportunity that Albert Schweitzer had to meditate upon today's gospel story of the rich man and Lazarus and determine, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do to help the many, many who are poor? To ask ourselves that same question that Schweitzer asked: how can I live such a happy life while so many people in the world are suffering? How are you going to answer that question? We know what Schweitzer did. What are you going to do?